Hello everyone, I'm Branson Dow, and this is our presentation on unseen justice. The driving motivation for this entire presentation was, will and should we put television cameras in the Supreme Court? Well, we thought, who else to ask than the Supreme Justices themselves?
But I see no reason why, beyond that concern, American people should not have access to it.
I do think it's something that I would want to listen to the views of, if I were confirmed, to my colleague.
Television cameras in our courtroom, and I argued that we should do it. I thought that it would.
I have had positive experiences with cameras when I have been asked to join experiments.
But I have said that I think it would be a terrific thing to have cameras in the courtroom.
I come to it with an open mind.
Confirmed, I will have an open mind on it, and I do think when you attend oral argument at the Supreme Court, as I have many times, or you attend the announcement of decisions, it is extraordinarily impressive to cameras in the Supreme Court.
I would certainly keep an open mind about allowing cameras in the Supreme Court.
Well, Senator, I would want to discuss with the other justices their views and understand all of the various potential issues related to cameras in the courtroom before I took a position on it.
Well, as you can see, why does this even matter? All of those justices across all of those various hearings didn't say, no, I don't want any cameras in the courtroom. In fact, they either said they'll keep an open mind or they would actually appreciate cameras in the courtroom. But at the end of the day, in a C-SPAN survey conducted in 2022, it noted that 84% of those polled believe that the Supreme Court decisions impact their everyday lives, and that's our lives too. Therefore, we believe that the lack of televised Supreme Court sessions create a communication shortfall for the public, and as we've learned over the past 2 weeks, that ultimately harms democracy. And we analyze this through 3 different lenses. First, the existing Supreme Court content is simply not engaging enough. Second, a deficit of Supreme Court coverage creates a disconnect between the justices and our citizens. And finally, the current coverage lacks a holistic view of what the Supreme Court entails.
So now that you know our thesis and our 3 points, I'm going to hit the brakes and take a step back and learn a little about history and how the Supreme Court has communicated to the public in the past. Our first one takes place in 1834, way back in the day when we first had our official reporter, I do not know his name, I'm so sorry, published bond volumes known as the United States Report. This is the only way of a systematic system to keep reliable papers in order, so there's some type of system. All right. Number 2, 1955. These are all over the place. They're not like, there's stuff in between this, but these are the main 6 that I thought were really important. Number 2, 1955. Tape recording is allowed. Perfect, right? But it's not meant for the public. We don't have that transparency still. It's just another way to have another system, but let's see the video. Number 3, 1973, Public Information Office, or the PIO, was founded to manage information, distribute it, and creating an official route to the public. This is the first time we've seen some type of transparency between the public and the Supreme Court. Number 4, audio recording is released. Finally, this is in what? 1981. Sad thing is, you might think it becomes right as the recording is released. No, there's a little bit of delay. The delay is at the end of the term. So if you really want to watch something or listen to something, you gotta wait. Sad. Number 5, 2003. Yes, the greatest year. I'm born. But Supreme Court finally launches their own official website. They have all types of things, case info, options, court material, all that type of jazz, all at the touch of one button. And finally, the most recent system, since COVID, coronavirus, all that, they added a live audio broadcast that happened March of 2020. Statistic-wise, from NPR, 1.5 million listeners listen to it. And that's just only like listening. So imagine if you add that onto the video too. Imagine those numbers.
And that brings me perfectly into our next point. The existing Supreme Court content is simply not engaging enough. As a Pew Research Center noted, and we also learned in class, digital devices and television make a large majority of the market for our people to actually watch the Supreme Court. And radio is simply 6%. These audio transcriptions, essentially, of the Supreme Court lack the ability to be spread easily across all of our digital devices. Who do you know wakes up and says, you know what, I want to listen to a Supreme Court ruling or Supreme Court session on their podcast app?
Maybe some people.
But that point is further exacerbated when we bring up the C-SPAN survey in 2022, where it states only 46% of the voters even knew there were live audio oral arguments. The fact is, people don't actively seek out these audio recordings, and thus brings us into the importance of why television and bringing cameras into the courtroom will help accessibility to the content. As we learned in class, and as well as a further research study, video content can activate more senses and increase our overall comprehension. In a study conducted on a group of college students, it noted that watching a video and then taking a test, as opposed to simply listening to it, showed a higher recall rate. Therefore, being able to watch the Supreme Court means you're better able to digest that information and understand what's truly being talked about. Furthermore, we can kind of compare and contrast what could be with the Supreme Court. When we take a look at Kevin McCarthy's 15 rounds of votes when he got elected Speaker, the first couple of videos on YouTube racked up over close to 3 million views. And this was simply just one moment in American history. Imagine that extrapolated to all the monumental Supreme Court cases that have been ruled and adjudicated on. Therefore, we can note that the existing Supreme Court content simply isn't engaging enough, both on the knowledge side and on the reach side.
Tell you about, a new poll that was done by Fairleigh Dickinson University that shows that 3 in 5 U.S. voters think that televising the Supreme Court proceedings would be good for democracy. And joining us on the phone is Professor Peter Woolley, who is the Public Mind Poll Director for the university.
Good morning, Brett. This is a national telephone poll of randomly selected registered voters across the country. So this is a representative group of American voters. And the main goal was to find out whether people thought that TV was not just something they favored or didn't favor, but whether it was something that would aid in democracy or not. Televising arguments in front of the Supreme Court would be good for democracy, or whether they thought it might undermine the authority and the dignity of the court. And in that case, by a margin of really better than 2-to-1, voters said that they thought it would be good for democracy rather than undermine the authority or dignity of the court.
Well, now why is that important? As Ms. Bronner and Peter Woolley noted out, there's a ratio of 2-to-1 of those polled that believe that being able to watch the Supreme Court would be that much more helpful to democracy. And when we take a look at a Gallup survey, a Gallup poll, in 2022, 25% of those who responded lacked confidence in the Supreme Court or had confidence in the Supreme Court. This is really important and lends us into our next point that the deficit of coverage in the Supreme Court simply creates a disconnect. The fact is, the Supreme Court is one of the last American institutions to not have any type of television coverage. And as Siegel and Chemerinsky notes, we deserve the ability to see our tax dollars at work. There's no reason to simply gatekeep Supreme Court behind closed doors and closed sessions. And as we noted in the C-SPAN and in the polls, being able to witness those different sessions allow us to instill more trust and more confidence in our judicial system. As multiple research studies show, being able to actually witness or see video content, whether in these studies, being able to see the video content meant that they trusted it and believed it more. In that case, it would be extrapolated to the Supreme Court. Being able to see the justices at work, being able to see our judicial branch hard at work means that we will be able to increase the trust and confidence in our systems. And ultimately, if we take a look at all the monumental government coverage that has occurred in the United States, being able to share the Supreme Court, how it works, what goes on, and how these judges and lawyers are going about their oral arguments, it means we'll be able to provide better access to not only the citizens, but the entire world. At the end of the day, increasing accessibility isn't a bad thing. It means that everyone is better able to be equipped to make better informed decisions when it comes to our democracy.
As we hit our last and final pill, the current coverage is lacking a holistic view of the Supreme Court. And listen, we have court reporters, we have analysts, but they're not going to be able to hit every single emotion or hit every single verbal cue. You could have Stephen King, I don't even know another author, Shakespeare, all that. They could be the greatest writer of all time, but they're going to miss out on those certain emotional appeals of court. watching it, you being able to visually see it. So going into verbal cues and nonverbal cues, the second thing, listen, if you have one candidate and they're slouched over and they're talking like this, blah, 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 you can tell they're nervous, they're itching, they're grabbing this, and they ask questions, they're looking at the sky, you can say, what is he looking at? What's going on? But the other candidate stands up strong, he looks at the crowd, talks to people, you see that he's doing what he's saying. There's two different things, and you're going to vote for the second person over the first person. I feel like that's a huge point to stand on. If you cannot see those nonverbal cues, you're in the dark. It's very much like that Nixon and JFK thing we talked about. Everyone liked Nixon because on radio you couldn't see him, and everyone liked him because he was JFK was media trained, and they saw him, he was engaged, and they thought he was a better person. To go to my third point, evolution from, transcripts to audio, et cetera, people have been improving and learning about the courts. So what's the next step after the audio? Video! Going up to our next thing, potential solutions, televise broadcast for the Supreme Court. I know, crazy one. How did we pull that one out? I know, very complex theory, very complex solution. But if we look at this over here, 65% of voters agree that the Supreme Court should allow television coverage. Pretty good. 70% of voters agree that allowing television coverage would build trust in the court's process. That's hard to see. And we're talking about population. That's pretty good. You're thinking, well, they can't just go up to the Supreme Court and be like, hey, we want this right now. They're not going to go, oh, yeah. No, they're just going to look at you like this and then turn away. So, to put that little pressure on it, to put pressure on them, public pressure and using reverse agenda settings. The media controls a lot, definitely the public opinion. We've learned that in class. So when we're able to put pressure with either social media, gathering, public events, community engagement, raise awareness, they're going to see that like, oh gosh, people want this, so we should look into this. So adding that type of pressure from the media on us is a huge factor of influencing us. But I'm going to hand it off to Branson, who's going to bring up the conclusion.
So, in conclusion, our main argument is that the lack of televised Supreme Court sessions create a communication shortfall, thus harming democracy. As we can see, not having the full information from the Supreme Court oral arguments or sessions means that we're less equipped to make the right decisions when it comes to election season. First, we noted how the existing Supreme Court content is simply not engaging enough. Second, a deficit of coverage means that there's a blatant disconnect, lack of trust, and lack of confidence between the citizens and the judicial branch. And then finally, the current coverage simply lacks a holistic view of what goes on in the Supreme Court. We noted our solution, as nice it would be to have Brian Lamb walk into the Supreme Court with cameras, that most likely won't happen. Thus, we have to start small, whether it's starting a grassroots campaign, petitions, contacting your local politicians. We have to slowly sway the media and the general populace to flip the tables back and make the issue of bringing cameras and televising the Supreme Court a larger issue, and eventually bring cameras into them. And here are references. Yeah, yeah.
Thank you very much.
Question?
So many people who argue against putting cameras within the Supreme Court argue that televising the court would potentially politicize, like how, or like dramatize, proceedings with the court, like they have done in like the House and Senate. What would you say against that point?
So yeah, Justice Roberts has been extremely adamant about the fact that, if you televise it, the lawyers will act differently, or some of his colleagues will judge or talk differently. But the fact still remains that they have already provided live audio broadcasts of the Supreme Court. All the justices and everyone in this courtroom's voices are already heard. So the only thing that you would be now introducing is nonverbal communication. And that's a small bridge to gap, considering the fact that we've gone from transcriptions to live audio, and next up is simply video. So that's my kind of train of thought on that. Furthermore, to answer your question of like, will things get dramatized and whatnot, the Senate and the House, on TV, you see, they must be talking to a large group of people. But we learn by showing up in there that it's essentially empty. And this can be this same type of mentality can be applied to the Supreme Court, where we're allowing more transparency and being able to actually see what goes on. We know that the senators and the representatives simply don't have an audience or whatnot, but they still want to send that message out. And why should we stop the Supreme Court from getting their message out, whether it's oral arguments or whatnot?
is because I'm not super knowledgeable on like process and like a Supreme Court hearing. So for someone who like would not be unsure what they're watching, how would you like make sure that those audience is like they're taking the time to watch it and listen to it and see it, but if they don't know what's going on, how would you like help them engage more?
Start. Great question. As someone who's not really into politics, but very new to politics, you kind of just Google it. That's kind of how I did it. But if you're trying to speak on like, I don't really know what you're trying to say.
I guess my point of view on that is I think there's multiple ways you can go about it. For one, you can go C-SPAN route and just broadcast whatever goes on, and it's up to the viewer to learn and listen and sit in the back of the room and Google what terminology is being used. Or you can go the second way and use that footage and have news reporters and journalists and whatnot kind of break that down. But I think right now it's better to have the option, to have someone break it down for you, to be able to explore and research on your own, than not have any options at all. Because ultimately, having more information means you're better equipped to make the right decisions in our democracy.
One more question.
What about what was the most valuable piece of information that you guys learned while you were researching for this project?
I can go first.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think the, I guess, most valuable or the coolest thing I learned was when I was looking at all of like the Supreme Court justices or whatnot. I think it started in like 1991 and went all the way up until Justice Jackson. And I had to cut that video down to just the latest 9 justices. But the fact is that if you watch all the nomination hearings and whatnot, there's a continual pattern of either, yes, I'm with it, yes, I've participated in experiments and enjoyed it, or I'm kind of hold off on my thoughts. There wasn't like adamant rejection of television, televised Supreme Court sessions. That was just something cool.
Well, I would say my favorite thing is definitely that nonverbal thing. We learned that in class, but from looking up research-wise, learning about the history of how it's kind of processed, like it started like 1750, research reporting on it, and then it's slowly transitioned to audio and everything for the court. And we got to like a whole different organization where it's slowly transferring of information, and kind of just the way history's slowly gotten more transparent with us. And now, finally, if we televise it, full transparency. So that's probably the coolest thing I've learned.
Great. Give him a hand. Thank you, gentlemen.
The other one, of course, is these guys that did the Supreme Court thing. They hit the nail on the head. And it's a good lesson because what was going on there, these people were going before the committee and they knew that the members wanted them to appreciate and get on the television. So they didn't say anything. They said, yeah, I'll take a look at it. I knew in every case, once they get on the court, I know this for a fact because I had a close friend that was a Supreme Court justice, that once they get behind the doors, the 9 of them, they say, no, or my dead body. They're not going to put it on television. Now the next guy or woman, could come out of this room right here. You're going to be more of an age where you see the need for communication. But that was incredibly well done. They all were, but that, of course, hits home with us because we've been working on the court for the last 45 years. Anyway, you're a great group. You're terrific. I trust you. Let's wake up. Of course. Uh-oh, it's a picture. More than one picture. Who am I with here? I'm going to need my glasses. It's my wife. I have 8,000 pictures of my wife because when I take pictures, I like to have a human being in it. So wherever we're walking, she's the one that's the human being in the picture. So she'll get a kick out of that one. That's a great idea. Love it. And this one, this is the best. Are you all in there?
Yes.
You sure?
Yeah.
Thank you.